My name is Vivian, and I am 34 years old. Not so long ago, I was just another face in the crowd, a woman people walked past on busy New York sidewalks, a name that barely registered on the family tree of one of Manhattan's oldest lineages. I was never the sort of person others imagined would one day sit at the heart of a story like this. But there are always things beneath the surface, aren't there? Strength's hidden storms brewing. What I didn't realize was just how much those undercurrents would come to matter on a cold Thanksgiving night in the city that never really sleeps. If you've ever wondered what happens when loyalty, money, and pride collide, well, you may want to stay with me. Because what I thought I knew about my family and what they thought they knew about me would be torn apart before the pumpkin pie was even served. I was raised on the edge of things. My mother, Lauren, was the youngest daughter-in-law of the Harrington family, and I, their little branch, grew up watching from the sidelines while my cousins, especially Ava, basked in the limelight. Ava was the golden child. 5 years older than me, she was everything the Harringtons adored: elegant, accomplished, perfectly dressed, the sort of woman whose laughter seemed to command a room. She always had the best seat at every table, the biggest slice of every cake, and the first word in every conversation. I, on the other hand, seemed to blend into the wallpaper whenever I earned straight, as the family's response was a polite smile and a nod. Of course you did, Vivian. We expect nothing less. But when Ava won a regional ballet competition or hosted a fundraiser, the Harringtons threw parties in her honor. My mother tried to shield me from the sting, but the message was clear. Some people are born with a spotlight, the rest of us are just expected to applaud. There are memories I carry that still sting after all these years. On my 10th birthday, I was promised a party in the penthouse's grand hall, a tradition for every Harrington child. But that morning I found my mother quietly folding away the decorations. There's been a change, sweetheart. Ava has a fencing tournament finals and everyone's going. We'll celebrate next week. Next week never came. No cake, no candles, just leftover slices of disappointment. Then there was my high school graduation. I'd worked hard for that day, scraped and studied, earned scholarships the family barely acknowledged. The morning of the ceremony, my mother's phone rang, another emergency at one of the family's foundations. "We've heard your speech during practice," she told me, "and you know your cousins are waiting at the yacht club. You'll understand someday, Vivian." College was a similar lesson. The Harringtons set up trust funds for Ava and her sisters, sending them abroad for grand adventures and expensive degrees. My acceptance to Columbia was met with congratulations, but the family coffers stayed closed. I worked, took out loans, and learned how to balance an account with less than $100 left at the end of the month. Ava, meanwhile, called from Florence to describe Tuscan sunsets and designer boutiques. I learned to listen with a smile, hiding the ache behind stories of my own. But here's the truth, and the part I never told anyone, not even my mother. When my grandmother's health began to fail, I was the one who visited every Saturday. I made her tea, helped her sort medication, and paid the private home nurse when the family's accountant said the budget didn't allow for it. No one knew where the funds came from, and no one asked. I simply wanted her to be comfortable in her last years. When she needed company in the hospital, I was there, often the only one. Through it all, I never stopped hoping for some sign that the Harringtons saw me as one of their own. Perhaps that's why I kept helping in small, quiet ways. When my aunt lost her job, I arranged an interview for her at the gallery where I worked. When a cousin's wedding ran over budget, I slipped a check to the caterer. Each time, the family praised Ava for her generosity and never thought to look my way. I suppose you could call it a slow education in the nature of gratitude, or maybe just a stubborn refusal to become bitter. What I didn't know, as I often tell friends now, was that all of this, the slights, the quiet help, the years of feeling invisible, were paving the way for something much bigger than I could imagine. As the Thanksgiving reunion approached that year, I told myself things might be different. The family matriarch was gone. Perhaps old wounds would heal in the warmth of holiday lights and laughter. But if you have ever felt like the reliable one that nobody appreciates, you'll understand what came next. That night at the Harrington penthouse, everything I believed about family would be turned inside out. If you want to know what really happens when the tables are finally turned, well, keep listening. The first course was barely served before the secrets began to unravel. Thanksgiving in Manhattan is a strange affair. The city below glitters with parade floats and tourists jostling for photos, but in the Harrington penthouse the mood was sharp as crystal stemware. That night the air crackled, not with warmth, but with the kind of brittle politeness that always precedes a storm. I arrived early, as I always do. Old habits die hard. The elevator doors opened onto marble and glass, the scent of designer candles already filling the air. Staff hurried by with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Laughter from the grand salon floated down the corridor. I caught a glimpse of Ava, perfectly composed, surrounded by her usual circle, Zoe, Riley, and Scarlett, each one polished and poised. As I slipped out of my coat and tried to quiet my nerves, I reminded myself that I belonged here at least by blood, if not by status. My mother Lauren hovered near the windows, clutching her purse a little too tightly. I offered her a smile, but she just patted my hand. Remember Viv's shoulders back. Don't let them see you rattled. Ava's greeting was as chilly as the November wind outside. Oh, Vivian, you made it. Her eyes flicked over my simple dress. I suppose you wore that. How brave. A few of her friends exchanged glances, hiding smiles behind crystal flutes. There's a ritual to these gatherings, a peck on the cheek, an air kiss, a silent competition for who can seem the most indifferent. I learned long ago that the trick is to act as though none of it matters. Still, the evening had barely begun before the first cut landed. Ava waited until everyone was seated at the long, glittering table, then raised her glass with a smirk. I'd like to toast to family, she announced, especially those who have managed to rise above their circumstances. She looked straight at me. Vivian, you must feel so lucky to have a seat at this table tonight. Truly, it's what Thanksgiving is all about, gratitude. A ripple of laughter. My face flushed, but I forced a smile. If you've ever been on the receiving end of a backhanded compliment, you'll know it's not the words themselves that hurt, but the message they carry. You're here, but you don't really belong. As the meal progressed, the conversation turned to business, investments, gallery openings, topics carefully curated to remind outsiders just how exclusive this world could be. Someone mentioned my recent promotion at the gallery. Before I could respond, Zoe chimed in. Oh, right. The little nonprofit, isn't it? That must be fulfilling. My mother always said charity work is for those who can't compete in the real world. Scarlett added, at least you're not still teaching Vivian. Imagine the horror. I glanced at my mother, who quietly dabbed her napkin, cheeks pink with embarrassment. She knew how these games were played. I squeezed her hand beneath the table, but she only managed a faint smile. Things escalated as dessert arrived. A server new to the Harrington household misheard Ava's order and placed a slice of pie in front of me instead. Ava's face darkened. That's for me. Take it to the kitchen, please. Vivian can wait her turn. When the server hesitated, Ava reached for her wine glass and, with a theatrical gesture, accidentally tipped it toward me. A cascade of red splashed down my dress. Oh my, I'm so clumsy, she cooed, barely concealing her satisfaction. Around us, laughter fizzled, some nervous, some delighted at the spectacle. There's a moment when humiliation stops feeling sharp and simply becomes a dull ache. That was the moment for me. I excused myself, crossing the gleaming floor, heart pounding. As I reached the powder room, my phone buzzed, group notifications lighting up the screen. But the night's real surprise came just as I returned to the table. A hush swept over the room. All eyes turned to the far end, where a massive television screen usually reserved for holiday movies or family slideshows flickered to life. Someone had connected their phone. At first, I thought it was an accident until the familiar ping of a WhatsApp group chat rang out. There for all to see was the family's private group chat, every snide comment, every cutting joke about the poor cousin, every message about how Vivian should be grateful for hand-me-downs. My name, my mother's, dragged through digital mud for everyone to read. Zoe's message, let's just keep her out of the family photo this year, please. Scarlett, I still can't believe Lauren expects an invitation after what happened. Pathetic. Ava, bold as ever. This is our world. She's just visiting. The silence was deafening. Eyes darted, throats cleared. My cheeks burned, but this time it wasn't from shame, it was something different, something raw and cold that I hadn't felt in years. Ava scrambled for her phone, trying to disconnect the screen. Somebody turn that off. This isn't funny, she snapped, voice shaking just a little. Before anyone could move, a calm, precise voice cut through the tension. If I may, said Evelyn, the family's attorney, her presence somehow both comforting and authoritative. There's more to discuss tonight. I suggest everyone remain seated. Murmurs swept the table, but no one dared argue. I glanced at my mother, who squeezed my hand now, her eyes shining not with shame, but with something like hope. I did not know then, as the laughter died and the screens went black, that this was only the beginning. The night was far from over, and the secrets waiting to be revealed would change everything. There's a peculiar quiet that falls over a room right after a public embarrassment, like the hush after a thunderclap. The kind of quiet where every guest suddenly finds a reason to check their napkin, their watch, their phone. In that hush, Evelyn, the family's attorney, rose from her chair with a dignity that seemed to command attention from even the most dismissive Harrington cousin. "Thank you everyone for remaining," she began, voice steady. Per Mrs. Harrington's explicit wishes, tonight's gathering was never simply a dinner. It was a final act, a moment to share her intentions for the future of this family. The air prickled with expectation. Ava, sitting ramrod straight at the far end of the table, rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, this is ridiculous. We all know how this goes. The trust is divided as usual. 10% here, a keepsake there. Let's not pretend we're all equals, Evelyn." There was an uncomfortable shuffling, some laughter quickly silenced. My heart pounded as Evelyn calmly opened a leather-bound folder. "In accordance with New York state law and Mrs. Harrington's will, I am to read the primary clauses now in front of all heirs present." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle over us. I watched the faces around the table, Ava's growing impatience, Riley's carefully masked excitement, Zoe and Scarlett barely suppressing grins. My mother, Lauren, sat silent, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Evelyn continued. "Mrs. Harrington has established a trust fund amounting to $26 million designated to a single beneficiary. This fund is subject to several strict conditions." Ava leaned forward, a wolfish glint in her eye. "I assume you'll be sending the details to my office, Evelyn. My lawyers can review them after the holiday." Her arrogance was palpable. Evelyn did not look her way. Instead, she turned to me, her voice clear as the winter air. "The sole beneficiary of the Harrington Family Trust is Vivian, granddaughter of Lauren and daughter of the youngest Harrington son." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. I glanced at my mother, who was trembling, lips parted in shock. Around the table, jaws dropped, forks clattered to china. Ava's mouth hung open. This is a mistake. She doesn't belong in this family, let alone as heir to the estate." Zoe's voice was shrill. "This isn't possible. Vivian's always been the outsider." Scarlett simply muttered, "Unbelievable. This is a joke." Evelyn's eyes swept the room, unwavering. "Mrs. Harrington's decision is final. The trust will be managed with oversight by my office. However, there are stipulations. The beneficiary must oversee the establishment and operation of a nonprofit foundation focused on educational equity and community support for no less than 5 years. Any deviation, misappropriation, or legal challenge will result in the full forfeiture of the trust, with all assets reverting to the city's endowment fund." A hush fell again, sharper than before. Before anyone could speak, Evelyn produced a sealed envelope. "There is more. Mrs. Harrington left additional instructions to be revealed tonight. This includes records pertaining to Lauren, the only family member who remained at her side during her final illness." She broke the seal. Inside were letters, medical receipts, and a notarized statement from Mrs. Harrington herself. "Lauren, who was once cast out by this family, proved herself by caring for me in ways my own children could not. She and her daughter are the true heirs to what I value most: integrity and kindness." The blow landed hardest on those who had always assumed they would inherit simply by right of birth. Ava's cheeks blazed. "This is insane. I have devoted my life to this family. She's a charity case. She doesn't even deserve to be at this table." Evelyn stood her ground, folding her hands atop the will. "If any member of this family wishes to contest Mrs. Harrington's decision, you are free to do so in court. But I must warn you, there is further evidence to be considered before such a step." She gestured to an assistant who wheeled in a discreet flat-screen monitor. "There is security footage Mrs. Harrington requested be shown in the event of any dispute." Evelyn explained, her tone even. Ava's bravado faded just a shade. "What are you doing? This is harassment, you can't." But no one moved. Not a soul breathed. The room moments earlier, so full of laughter and arrogance, now belonged to Evelyn, and for the first time in my life to me. I felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. For years I had watched from the shadows, told myself that belonging meant remaining silent. Tonight I saw how quickly the rules changed when truth came to light. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was just how damning that evidence would be. There's a sound I'll never forget: the muted gasp of an entire family when the walls they've built around their secrets finally crumble. As Evelyn's assistant adjusted the screen and pressed play, the room held its collective breath. On the screen, a black and white video flickered to life: security camera footage from the penthouse hallway, timestamped just days before Mrs. Harrington's passing. The image was grainy, but the figures were unmistakable. Ava, clad in a silk robe, crept down the hallway well past midnight, pausing outside the door to my grandmother's study. She glanced around, then quietly let herself inside. Evelyn narrated calmly. This was recorded at 2:43 in the morning, 3 days before Mrs. Harrington's final hospitalization. What you are about to see was preserved per her direct instruction. On screen, Ava rifled through drawers, removing a small jewelry box and what looked like a stack of documents. She tossed the papers into the fireplace, then pocketed a velvet pouch. The video zoomed in on her face, frozen in an expression of smug triumph. Ava's voice shattered the silence, brittle and panicked. "This is an invasion of privacy. You have no right. My lawyer will." But Evelyn held up a hand. Mrs. Harrington was aware of these actions. She ensured all valuables and important papers had already been secured elsewhere. The footage was kept in trust to be presented only if her wishes were contested. Scarlett blurted out, "Ava, is this true? Did you really do that?" Ava's composure crumbled. "It was just some old family junk, none of it mattered. I was protecting us, protecting the family from outsiders." Her eyes darted to me, pleading and venomous all at once. The room shifted palpably. Riley, always Ava's most loyal defender, pulled her chair away with a sharp scrape. Zoe shook her head in disbelief. "All these years, how could you?" Even the older relatives, once so eager to dismiss me and my mother, now sat in uneasy silence. The weight of the family's secrets, always hidden under silver platters and polite smiles, was suddenly out in the open. Evelyn spoke again, her voice firmer now. "For clarity, any attempt to interfere with Mrs. Harrington's legacy will result in legal action. The trust cannot be divided, and any challenge will dissolve it, with all assets forfeited to public charity." Ava, red-faced, stood and pointed at me. "You think you're better than us. You think a few visits and handouts make you family. You're nothing but a charity case we let sit at our table." My mother, Lauren, rose to dignity in every line of her face. "We were never guests in this family, Ava. We simply remembered what it meant to care for someone even when it was inconvenient." There, in front of everyone, I found myself not ashamed but strangely free. All my life, I had been told to keep quiet, to not make waves. But as I looked around the room at the cousins who'd once sneered and the aunts who'd whispered, I felt a tide shift within me. I drew a slow breath and spoke, voice steady. "I spent my life believing kindness would eventually be recognized. Maybe I was foolish, but I'd rather be a fool who loves than someone who takes and destroys." Ava tried to rally her supporters, but the old alliances were gone. Riley and Scarlett kept their distance. Even Zoe, who had always found a reason to laugh at my expense, now averted her eyes. Evelyn's closing words rang out. "This is the end of contestation. If Vivian declines the trust or fails to uphold its purpose, the legacy ends here. No other Harrington will inherit. That is the price of betrayal." As the meeting adjourned, Ava stormed from the room, followed by a few stragglers, her defeat complete, her image forever tainted by her own actions. Reporters waiting outside, drawn by rumors of family drama, caught every word of her outburst. The Harrington name, once synonymous with old money grace, was now the subject of gossip columns and late-night talk shows. The penthouse, with all its grandeur, felt suddenly smaller. My mother and I lingered in the empty hall as the others melted away, the echoes of the night's revelations lingering like perfume. For the first time, I saw clearly, power isn't in the size of your inheritance or the prominence of your last name. It's in the strength to endure humiliation, the courage to speak up, and the grace to choose integrity when you have every reason to walk away. What none of them realized was that the greatest inheritance Mrs. Harrington left behind was not money or jewels, but the opportunity to redefine what family could be. And as I would soon learn, sometimes justice isn't a thunderclap, it's the quiet, unstoppable dawn that follows the longest night. The aftermath of that night rippled through the Harrington family like an aftershock, unseen but undeniable. By morning, the city's tabloids and online forums buzzed with whispers: heiress, disinherited, charity scandal rocks, Manhattan dynasty. The penthouse, once the setting for champagne celebrations and whispered secrets, now felt more like a mausoleum for broken pride. Ava's fall was swift and public. Videos of her outburst, her voice shrill, her face twisted with fury, spread like wildfire. No amount of press releases from the family's longtime publicist could erase what had been seen. Her social media followers abandoned her by the thousands. Invitations to exclusive events were rescinded. Even the philanthropic board that had once been her stage now issued a polite but firm request for her resignation. But this isn't just a story about comeuppance, is it? It's about what we do with the power handed to us after a lifetime of being overlooked. In the days that followed, Evelyn helped me navigate the practical realities of the trust, opening new accounts, drafting bylaws for the foundation, appointing an oversight committee to ensure transparency. Every form I signed felt like another brick laid in the foundation of my new life. It was not wealth that changed me, but responsibility. The old alliances among the Harrington cousins fractured beyond repair. At a hastily called family meeting, I stood at the head of the grand table not as a supplicant but as the executor of Mrs. Harrington's final wishes. Ava tried one last time to rally the troops. "You're going to destroy everything this family built if you refuse to share. This isn't justice, Vivian. It's revenge." But I shook my head, voice quiet but resolute. "No, Ava. This is accountability. You taught me to be strong by showing me exactly who not to become." Her jaw tightened, but there was nothing left to say. Even those who had once championed her, Riley Zoe Scarlett, remained silent, unwilling to risk further association with disgrace. I made my intentions clear. The trust would fund a foundation for educational equity just as my grandmother had wished. No family member could draw a salary or benefit financially. Every $26 million in total would be accounted for in annual public reports. "Family is not a birthright," I said, "but a choice we make each day. I choose to use this legacy for good." Lauren, my mother, stood beside me, dignity and quiet pride in her eyes. For the first time in decades, she spoke not as an outcast but as the matriarch's true heir. "We will not be defined by what was taken from us, but by what we give." The public humiliation Ava suffered grew each day. Her former friends, socialites who had once flocked to her lavish parties, turned their backs. Old photographs disappeared from society pages. A news anchor summed it up. "In the end, character not cash determines who gets to write the story." For me, the greatest moment came not in triumph, but in a quiet afternoon as I signed the final document establishing the Harrington Foundation. My name at last written alongside those who had once dismissed me. I remembered the years spent yearning for acceptance, the nights spent wondering if I would ever belong. Now belonging meant something else entirely. Lauren and I packed our things and left the penthouse for the last time, stepping into the crisp Manhattan air, not as refugees but as victors. I didn't look back. Reporters called after us asking for statements, but we kept walking. Above the clamor, I heard my mother's voice. "You've done something rare, Vivian. You've changed the meaning of family for all of us." And so, in the city that rewards ruthlessness but secretly yearns for redemption, the tables had finally turned. The legacy I inherited was not measured in dollars or diamonds, but in the freedom to define myself on my own terms. If you've ever wondered what real revenge looks like, let me tell you, it isn't shouting or gloating. It's quiet, persistent decency and the courage to choose a different ending. 16 months have passed since that fateful Thanksgiving night, the night everything changed, and the Harrington name was remade in the eyes of Manhattan and perhaps more importantly in my own. The winter that followed was sharp and beautiful. The city's chaos faded into something softer, almost companionable, as I traded the marble hallways of the penthouse for a modest apartment on the Upper West Side. A place I chose not for status but for the sunlight that spilled across the Forted, in 40s.com, kitchen table each morning. It felt at last like a home of my own making. The old life, the world of careful words and cold shoulders, was gone. I'd stepped out of that gilded cage, and in doing so found a quiet freedom that neither trust funds nor titles could buy. I repainted the walls myself, planted lavender on the tiny balcony, and let my mother choose the curtains. There is joy I learned in simplicity, in living by one's own design. But of course my story was never just about escape. The real test was what came after, the life I would build from the pieces left behind. With the Harrington Foundation established, my days grew full of meaning, of purpose, of people whose loyalty was given, not bought. The nonprofit's mission was simple: expand access to quality education for young people who, like me, had once stood on the outside looking in. We funded scholarships, after-school programs, and even a mentorship initiative, pairing teens with local artists and entrepreneurs. I met extraordinary children, bright, determined, unbowed by circumstances. They reminded me of the girl I had been, the one who believed kindness was its own reward. Our team became my chosen family. Maya, the tireless program director, called me boss with a wink and never let a single holiday go uncelebrated. Thomas, our accountant, taught me the satisfaction of seeing every cent accounted for, every promise kept. There were long nights and anxious deadlines, of course, but there was laughter too. The sort of laughter that comes from belonging, not from superiority. Lauren, my mother, flourished. She found purpose volunteering at our community center, running a book club for children who'd never owned a library card. She told her story of exile, of endurance, of forgiveness, and was surprised when it inspired others. The local press ran a feature on her, "The Woman Who Wouldn't Quit," they called her. At the ceremony where she was given the Community Spirit Award, she simply said, "I never wanted to be admired. I only wanted to be heard." For the first time, the world listened. Professionally, the year was one of the hardest and most rewarding of my life. The foundation weathered its share of storms, a misallocated grant here, a disgruntled partner there, and once a viral social media post that nearly derailed a whole program. Each crisis was an opportunity to prove that this legacy was more than a name. I found myself learning what my grandmother must have known, that true leadership is not about being served, but about serving. There were mistakes, of course. There were days when I wondered if I was strong enough for the responsibility. But the children whose futures we changed, the families who wrote grateful letters, the teachers who stopped me on the street to say thank you, all of it reminded me that doing the right thing was never about ease, but about endurance. Personally, I opened myself to things I'd kept at arm's length for years. I reconnected with old friends, hosted dinners in my humble kitchen, and even adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy, stubborn terrier named Murphy, who quickly became my shadow. Love, I learned, comes in many forms: the steadfast kind between parent and child, the unexpected warmth of new friendship, the quiet pride that blooms when you finally forgive yourself for years spent trying to please the wrong people. And the rest of the family. Well, the world moves on, but old habits die hard. Ava, stripped of her influence and notoriety, attempted to mount a comeback. There were carefully staged apologies on social media, a few desperate articles in glossy magazines, and rumors of a tell-all memoir. But the doors she'd once breezed through were now closed. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Charity boards politely ignored her emails. Her name, once currency, had lost all value. Riley and Zoe scattered, one to Los Angeles, the other to a self-imposed exile in London. Scarlett tried to broker reconciliation for the sake of family unity, but it rang hollow. None of them found their footing in the world outside the Harrington shadow. Occasionally, messages would trickle in: an email on my birthday, a Christmas card with a clipped signature, sometimes a request for a reference, or even a small loan. I answered each one with the same gentle firmness: "Wishing you well. I hope you find what you're looking for." I did not hold grudges, but neither did I open doors to the past. The penthouse itself changed hands, auctioned to a tech magnate whose children now played in rooms where I'd once been invisible. The Harrington family's era had ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet fading of voices that had shouted the loudest. If you've walked with me this far, you might wonder what the true inheritance of the Harringtons was. Not $26 million, not marble floors or diamond rings, but the unbreakable certainty that family in the end is something we choose each day. I learned that you cannot force belonging. It must be offered and accepted in equal measure. Blood ties can wound as deeply as they can comfort. The real victory isn't in revenge or humiliation, it's in standing in the light of your own making, at peace with the path you've chosen. There are still moments when the old ache returns, when I see families laughing in Central Park or past the penthouse on Fifth Avenue. I wonder what might have been if kindness had been valued over pride. But then I remember the laughter in my apartment, the children who call me Miss Vivian, the mother who sits by my side at every dinner. And I know deep in my bones that I have all the family I will ever need. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? Do you believe forgiveness is a duty or a gift reserved for those who have earned it? I'd love to hear your stories, your wisdom, your own journeys through the tangled roots of loyalty and love. Leave a comment below. Let's remind each other that none of us walk these roads alone. And so, if you take anything from my story, let it be this: family is earned, not given. Integrity is worth more than inheritance. And there is always a way home, even if you have to build it yourself, brick by honest brick. Thank you for listening.